The US has always been a fan of territorial expansion. A lot of the key events in its history, such as the Louisiana Purchase, Lewis and Clark Expedition, and the annexation of Texas, were driven by the need for more territory. America truly would have been a different country without these key events. Imagine you are living in the year 1803, and you are a small-time farmer with big dreams. Then you wake up one morning and the newspapers are filled with headlines of the Louisiana Purchase. You think of all the land that can be cultivated and prepare to move immediately to the new lands. Not all Americans were as happy as a farmer at first when the news of the Louisiana Purchase hit the streets. In fact, the majority of the population thought it was a terrible idea. The cost of the land seemed too expensive and the boundaries of the Louisiana Territory weren't official. Eventually, the Americans came to their senses and appreciated the purchase. But before they could move west, the lands needed to be explored and mapped. The Lewis and Clark expedition took place and explored a huge chunk of the newly acquired lands. The Louisiana Purchase and the Lewis and Clark expedition changed the lives of the Americans forever by allowing for massive westward expansion. The U.S. acquired the Louisiana Territory through a series of luck. In the beginning, from 1762, Spain had owned the land, which included a major trade port in New Orleans and the Mississippi River. The location was very good for trade and was very profitable. The Spanish at the time allowed for the Americans to use the port as well. Then the King of Spain gave the territory to Napoleon, the leader of France, in 1802 because Spain's power at the time was very shaky. They also thought the Americans were going to try to acquire the lands by force. The reason Spain gave the land to France without protest was because France was a huge ally to them. With France in possession of the lands, the Americans started fearing that the French would not allow them to use New Orleans for trading. Because of this, they offered to buy New Orleans and West Florida for $10 million. The French refused the offer at first. France then started to encounter problems. First of all, France had a big money shortage problem, so they couldn't fund their army in America. Secondly, they suffered a loss in a battle in Haiti against slaves, so their army was weakened. Lastly, there was a threat of war coming from Great Britain. France eventually did go to war, and it was called the Napoleonic Wars. It started in 1803, which is when the Louisiana Purchase was made, and it ended in 1815. Since France didn't want to have even more problems, they settled with a deal to sell New Orleans, parts of Florida, and a huge chunk of their territory west of the Mississippi for $15 million. This meant that 1 acre costed less than 42 cents. The Americans were enthralled and prepared to explore and expand westwards. The U.S. needed to explore the territory they had bought in the Louisiana Purchase. Thomas Jefferson, the president at the time, hired Meriwether Lewis to lead an expedition throughout the area. The goal was to find new plants and animals, map the area, see what kinds of natives lived there, and to find the Northwest Passage, which was a route from America to Asia through sea. Lewis gathered 33 men in total, including his old friend William Clark. They called themselves the Corps of Discovery and left in May of 1804. The start of the trip was brutal. There was harsh weather and lack of food, and 1 person of the 33 died. As winter set in, the explorers got help from Native Americans and gained 2 more members to their group, Sacagawea and Toussaint Charbonneau. They helped navigate the area and were translators. The group finally reached the Pacific Ocean in November of 1805. They were in present-day Oregon, and they created Fort Clatsop. As they headed back, the group decided to split up into 2 to look for faster routes and to explore more territory. Lewis was in one group and Clark was in the other. As Lewis's group headed back to St. Louis, they met a barbaric group of Blackfeet Indians. They attempted to steal from the explorers, and 2 of the Blackfeets ended up dying in a skirmish. The 2 groups eventually met back at the Mississippi River and traveled to Washington together. Lewis became the governor of the Louisiana Territory upon return and died around 3 years later. The Louisiana Purchase and the Lewis and Clark expedition had great effects on the U.S. First of all, the Louisiana Purchase opened up a whole new world for Americans to explore. It literally doubled the size of the U.S. and 14 current states were a part of the territory. It also gave the U.S. great trading ports like New Orleans and the Mississippi River Valley. Even though the purchase received great criticism in the beginning, it turned out to be one of the most important events in American history. The Lewis and Clark expedition mapped out a huge chunk of northwestern United States. Relationships with the Native Americans would also have a lasting effect on the history of the U.S. Without these 2 events, the United States would be a significantly smaller and less important country today.
Culture is fundamental for any country to develop, and as foreign immigrants come into a country, they will bring in some of their own culture and add on to already existing culture. But what do you do if the country enforces the culture onto you? Why, you start a revolution, of course. Just like that, there was a big revolution in Texas against Mexico. Texas was originally a part of Mexico since 1821, but most of the people living in Texas were Americans. When the Mexican government attempted to conform the Texians into following their culture, the Texians started a revolution and tried to secede from Mexico. Texas was successful and was later annexed as a part of the United States of America. These events provided a lot of new land for the United States and helped it to expand westward. In the 1820s, Texas was land owned by Mexico. Because Texas lacked population, Mexico allowed many Americans to immigrate into the land. Mexico hoped that immigrants would become loyal Mexican citizens, but in 10 years, 25,000 people came into Texas and they continued to express their culture, language, tradition, and education. Santa Anna was the president of Mexico in 1834, but he overthrew the constitution and declared himself as dictator. He commanded the military to disarm the Texians because he knew that the conflicts were rising. In October 2, 1835, Mexican soldiers attempted to take a small cannon from the village of Gonzales, and Texians resisted with hastily assembled militia. Mexicans retreated without winning this, but this was the beginning of the revolution. Texians marched to San Antonio and lay siege for 2 months. In December 1835, the Mexican general accepted defeat and left the city. Late February 1836 was the Battle of San Antonio. The Mexicans were sieging Alamo, and the Texians were protecting this area from Santa Anna. Unfortunately, they will only be able to defend for 13 days. 200 Texan defenders were slain, and 350 rebellious Texans were executed by the Mexican army. The last battle of the Texas Revolution was the Battle of San Jacinto, when Sam Houston, the Texan general, caught up to Santa Anna at the banks of San Jacinto River and attacked him on April 21, 1836. Texan soldiers were saying to remember the Alamo, to encourage others to continue fighting and leading the way to victory. There were about 750 Texan soldiers, while there were around 1,500 Mexican soldiers. Texan military massacred half of Santa Anna's men, and Santa Anna was imprisoned. Annexation means to add to something larger or to incorporate new land into the domain of the city. Annexation of Texas was a controversial topic between 1836 and 1845 in the United States. On September 1836, huge population in Texas voted for the annexation, but was refused by Martin Van Buren, 8th President of the United States. After Texas was on its own as an independent country, it was continuously threatened by Mexico and Britain. British did not want to add Texas as a colony and also didn't want America to expand westward. However, on June 4, 1845, Anson Johns, 4th and last President of Texas, met with Congress and voted to annex with the United States. Both Congress and Convention voted for the annexation and was accepted to the United States on September 25 of 1845. On February 19, 1846, Anson Johns said, "The final act in this great drama is now performed. The Republic of Texas is no more." Texas Revolution was Texas breaking away from Mexico as an independent country, mostly because of differences between culture and politics. Texas annexation was a process of Texas uniting with the United States and was because of financial decay and instability of Texas. Texas incorporated with the United States as the 20th state, which made Mexico break off diplomatic relations with the United States. Most obvious changes and effects that the United States had was that it expanded westward. Texas provided financial potential and desire for more lands to America, while its annexation later caused the Mexican War and the relationship between Mexico and the United States got further deteriorated.
The manifest destiny was an attitude 19th century people in America had that territory expansion is not only possible, but it is also destined. The term manifest destiny was created by John L. O'Sullivan, an American columnist and editor, in reference to a growing conviction that the United States was preordained by God to expand throughout North America and exercise leadership over its neighbors. The manifest destiny made people believe that the Americans were going to have bigger land and a better lifestyle. The manifest destiny played a huge role for most of the territorial expansion of the United States. This belief led not only to the annexation of Texas but also the war with Mexico and the subsequent acquisition of California, Arizona, New Mexico, Nevada, Colorado, Oregon, and Washington. However, there was a problem with opinions of morality with Manifest Destiny. Most Wing Party candidates opposed the idea of expansion proposed in Manifest Destiny. Many wings opposed annexing Texas, going to war with Mexico, and the maltreatment of Native Americans simply on moral principles. Other wings opposed expansionism because they feared that much of the territory the United States would gain would become slave states. Lastly, they were afraid that their powers would be spread too thin if territorial expansion occurred, because more Wing Party members would be added if more states were created. Moreover, it developed from a great surge of nationalism following the War of 1812 as the nation expanded west. The United States has always expanded westward because of immigration. Immigrants would come from Europe, and the land closest to the Atlantic was more expensive, and the land further away was essentially free. Immigrants would travel west and settle on farmland deemed undesirable by a people already settled. People were constantly moving west to escape any problems they might have had in the east, whether it was economic, political, or social. To America, westward expansion seemed inevitable. In fact, some people believed that it was America's God-given right to settle in all of America. Manifest Destiny brought both positive and negative impacts. It helped America gain more land, money, and resources. It also gave opportunities to people who couldn't find it in the East. All the Americans benefited from Manifest Destiny, but Native American tribes living in the West had to be addressed. In the very beginning, the American government tried to expel the Native Americans from the country. President Andrew Jackson signed the Indian Removal Act on May 1830 and had the Second Seminole War, which caused thousands of deaths. Manifest Destiny developed America by providing international interactions and more money. Although there were lots of arguments regarding the ethics of this ideology, expansion turned out to be alright. In conclusion, America gained huge territories and it led them to become one of the strongest countries in the world today.